You may have heard of certain court cases referred to as the trial of the century. Well, when we get to Revelation chapter 10, we're going to see the conclusion of the trial of the ages, a trial that has been going on for longer than we could possibly imagine. And its conclusion happens in this chapter, in Revelation chapter 10. It's amazing. It's new information that you may not have ever heard before. And I am very excited to present it to you on this week's episode of Revelation Unveiled on Faith by Reason. Welcome to Faith by Reason. The website behind it all is faithbyreason.net. There you will find hundreds of hours of study material, blogs, podcasts, and video. And we are continuing our study of the book of Revelation. We are on Revelation chapter 10. And I can tell you, when I was first doing a layout of how I was going to present this book and how much time it would take, when I got to Revelation chapter 10, I said, this isn't going to take too long. I mean, it's a pretty short chapter. Not a whole lot going on here, really, nothing really relevant. It'll take about 20 minutes to get through and we'll be done with it. You just have, this angel who is very described in a very, vivid manner. He gives John a book to eat, which is weird. John eats the book, and then that's it. So I figured I'd be done with this. However, as I have studied this and revelation has come to me that this is something is going on way, way more than what you can see on the surface. And by the way, when I say new revelation, I am not saying that this is something that God has revealed to me that is not revealed to anyone else. No, I hate when people do that because that's really the sign of a heretic. God does not reveal anything to anyone that is outside of the Bible. Now, I'm not saying that God does not give people revelation, that God doesn't speak to people, but anything he says is going to conform to the Bible. God would not say anything that does not meet with the Bible. So what we're going to discuss today is new information to me, something that I just learned a couple months ago. And I wish I had learned it a year ago when I started doing this series, because it's really going to affect some of the things I've already presented. And it may be new information to you because this is not something that I've ever heard in all my years of studying Revelation and listening to commentators and reading commentaries. I haven't heard this before. And it's amazing, it's incredible, and I can't wait to take you on this journey. But it's already in the Bible. It's new information to me, possibly to you, but it's not new to readers of the Old Testament. Back in those days, first century Jews knew this. It's just us modern Christians who have, I wouldn't say forgotten this information, but it just hasn't been taught to us. It's been suppressed, not for malicious reasons, but for human reasons, for reasons of pride, and we'll get into that. But again, it's astonishing stuff, and it's really exciting, and I'm chomping at the bit to get through this. So it won't be a short 20-minute episode. It'll probably be a pretty long one, but it's going to be truly fascinating. I guarantee this information will change not only how you see the book of Revelation, but maybe how you see all of history. It's that impactful. So let's just jump into it. Let's just start by reading Revelation chapter 10. And I will not be able to get through all of chapter 10 in this episode. We're only going to get through the first 6 or 7 verses because what's in there is so impactful. So let's get started reading it. Revelation chapter 10. And I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and cried out with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Now when the 7 thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, Seal up the things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them. The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all the things that are in it, the earth and all the things that are in it, and the sea and all the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer. But in the days of the sounding of the 7th angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished, as he declared to his servant the prophets. And that ends with verse 7, and that's all we are going to discuss today, because that's going to take up the majority of our time. As you remember, we're in the parentheses between the 6th and 7th trumpet of Revelation chapters 8 and 9. And the 7th trumpet hasn't sounded yet, but as the final verse said that I read, that when that trumpet sounds, that will reveal the mystery of God. And that term mystery is very apropos here because this is a mystery, and it's a mystery that I'm going to be revealing to you today. So get ready, strap in for it. Now, normally this is the place where I start to break down the verse we just covered. However, I can't do this time. I'm going to get back to Revelation chapter 10, but we're going to take a long journey before we get back here because there are a lot of things that you need to understand before we can get back to Revelation chapter 10 and you fully grasp what's going on here. However, what I will do is give you a couple of my conclusions, and I will show you why they make sense a bit later. So conclusion number 1 is that these first 7 verses, as I alluded to earlier, represent the conclusion of the trial of the ages, a trial that has been going on since at least Daniel chapter 7, which we'll get to, and maybe even, and I would say even earlier than that, to maybe Genesis chapter 10. That's conclusion number 1. Conclusion number 2 is that this angel, who is so vividly described, face like the sun, rainbow, voice like a lion roaring, clothed in a cloud, this angel is Jesus. Now, wait a minute, I know what you're thinking. Jesus isn't an angel. Angels are created beings. Jesus is the Son of God, the pre-incarnate second member of the Godhead. Absolutely. However, remember that angel is a description. It's not a designation. Angel it means messenger, but it also is a designation for an Elohim. What is an Elohim? We've talked about this in the past. Elohim, which is translated God many times in the scriptures, but Elohim does not mean God in the way we think of it. Elohim is it's a designation of residency. Every entity that lives in the spiritual realm is an Elohim, just like in every entity that exists here in the physical world is man. So you have really 2 major players in all of history. You have the Elohim and you have man. So even though Elohim is translated as God, that doesn't mean that all Elohim are God. Elohim simply means you dwell in the spiritual realm. For example, I am an American. That is a proper title for me. If you call me an American, you're being accurate. However, that's not my name. That's not who I am. That's not who I am personally. But it's a proper description. The same thing with God. God is an Elohim, but there are other Elohim. All the angels are Elohim. Even fallen angels are Elohim. Demons are Elohim. Why? Because they inhabit the spiritual realm. So just like I'm an American, even though that's not my name, God, Jesus, angels, demons are Elohim because they inhabit the Elohim realm. So that term, that angel means Elohim. It means it's a spiritual being, not necessarily that it's a lower class created being. And we see an entity called the angel of the Lord throughout the Old Testament. And this angel of the Lord is a specific Elohim, a specific entity, a spiritual entity that represents Jehovah, the God of the Bible. He represents him. He has all the authority of the God of the Bible, and he demands worship. He is the only so-called Elohim or angelic being that is allowed to demand worship. We see that in Joshua when he comes over appears as the captain of the Lord's host, and he tells Joshua to take off his sandals for he's stepping on holy ground. And that same language is used in Exodus chapter 3 when we see the burning bush. And we know that the burning bush is God appearing to Moses. But also when you look at that, and I'll have the verse on the screen, the angel of the Lord appears in the burning bush. So in this burning bush scene, you have both God the Father speaking of as the burning bush, and you have the angel of the Lord in the burning bush. You may not have noticed that or been taught that when you've been taught the Exodus story, or if you watch the old 10 Commandments movie with Charlton Heston. There should, if that was accurate, there would be a burning bush and a Elohim, a spiritual being standing in the midst of the burning bush called the angel of the Lord. So the angel of the Lord is what's called a theophany. A theophany is a pre-incarnate Jesus. So my contention is that this angel in Revelation chapter 10 is Jesus. You don't have to believe me now. I will prove it to you, but I want to just give my conclusions beforehand. Now, in order to go to the next step of this understanding, we need to go all the way back to Daniel chapter 7. And I'm going to read to you some excerpts from Daniel chapter 7. And that's going to begin to give us the background that we need to understand what's going on in Revelation. Okay, Daniel chapter 7, I'm going to start with verse 2. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four beasts came out of the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs in his mouth between his teeth. And they said to it, thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horns were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and his hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued forth and came forth from him. 1,000 and thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Okay, so what is going on here, and what does it have to do with Revelation chapter 10? Well, stay with me. I'm going someplace. Stay with me, and I will explain it all to you. So let's start with his vision of these 4 beasts. What are these beasts? Well, these beasts are Therion. That's the term, that's the word for beast that we talked about earlier in the book of Revelation. That's Greek. And the Therion in Greece means, voracious beast, but it also means as a spiritual entity. These beasts are fallen spiritual entities. These are fallen angels. And each one of these 4 beasts represent a world empire. How do I know that? Well, if you keep reading Daniel chapter 7, because I stopped after verse 10, but if you keep reading, an angel gives Daniel an interpretation that these 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms or 4 empires that will arise from Daniel's time. The first beast, the one like a lion, is the kingdom of Babylon, which is where Daniel was currently residing. And the leader of that was Nebuchadnezzar. The second beast, the bear, is the Medo-Persian Empire, which would also rise up during the time of Daniel's lifetime, and it would take over the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, and that would last for a couple hundred years. And then you would have the next empire, the leopard with the wings, was the Empire of Greece. Again, this is, I'm not revealing anything that's not already known here. The book of Daniel is very clear that the next empire after the Medo-Persians is the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. Then after that will be a 4th and final empire. The final empire of the world will be the Roman Empire. And this will be the empire that lasts all the way until this day. And you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, the Roman Empire ended, 1700 years ago, give or take. And no, I would contend that the Roman Empire still exists to this day. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the point is not that these empires were headed by men, they were, but these empires were also lorded over by spiritual entities. Spiritual beings are over the nations of the earth. That is made very clear in the Bible, that every one of these empires has a spiritual entity behind it. In fact, we'll see if you go to if you go to Daniel chapter 10, you will see that there was an angel sent to Daniel to give him a message. However, this was during the time of the Persian Empire, and this angel, which is probably the angel Gabriel, had to fight with an entity called the Prince of the Power of Persia. And he fought with that entity to get to Daniel because Persia was the world empire at the time. So it was opposing this angel of God. And then the angel tells Daniel that after he's done giving Daniel this message, he has to go back and fight with this Prince of Persia again. And then after that, he'll have to fight with the Prince of the Power of Greece, because the Greece would be the next empire coming. And although these empires were in the physical realm governed by men, in the spiritual realm they are governed by angels. There are angelic beings that are over the nations of the world. Don't believe me? Well, let's go to another place. We need to go to Deuteronomy. Don't worry. We're going to get back to Daniel and we're going to get back to Revelation, but we need to take another detour to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 32, starting at verse 7, which is one of the most poorly translated areas of the Bible. Starting at verse 7, Deuteronomy 32, verse 7, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, and he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Now, your translation probably says, unless you're reading the English Standard Version, which I'm reading from, or a few others, it's going to say he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. That is a bad translation, and it is logically and temporally impossible. Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about when God divided the nations. So now we have to go all the way back a little further, stay with me, to Genesis chapter 10 and 11. What's happening here? You have the Babel incident, the so-called third dispensation, when man was gathered all in one place, and you had the first world empire under Nimrod and his wife / mother. Oh my God, Semiramis. We talked about them quite a bit in the past, so you can, if you want to know more, you can look into some of the things I've talked with them before and talked about with them in the past. But you know the Babel incident. They were trying to build a tower to reach to heaven, a gateway to God. Bab means gateway, El means God. They were building a gate to God, and God said they would have succeeded. They would have been able to build this gateway to literally invade heaven, but God stopped them. He confused their languages, and he divided them into nations based on their languages. So God divided the nations up, but he kept his own portion, Israel. Israel was going to be God's nation, but God disinherited the other nations, and he set their borders according to the number of the sons of God. Who are the sons of God? The B'nai Ha-Elohim. We see them in Genesis chapter 6. B'nai Ha-Elohim means angels. He fixed the borders according to the number of the sons of God. And there were 70 nations at this time. Yes, I know there are way more than 70 nations here, but on the earth at this point. But keep in mind that those borders were set by men through conquest and war and just arbitrary line drawing. According to God, there are only 70 nations, and he put an angelic being over each one of those nations. Now, they all fell. Every single one of those angels who he put over the nations that he disinherited ended up failing or falling. Why? Because they were worshipped. Remember that Babel is where false religion started. All false worship started. Semiramis had the people worship Nimrod as a god, and in a pantheon of gods, which was Nimrod, herself, Semiramis, and their son Tammuz. And again, you can go back to look at the Babel stuff in the second dispensation to get all. The second dispensation. So the third. The third dispensation. Forgive me. Look that up on faithbyreason.net and get more information about that dispensation and how that was the beginning of all false religions. Now, when the nations were divided, each one of these nations that were with Babel, they took their false worship, their worshiping of false gods with them. And once these angels were over the nations, they began to worship the angels, and the angels accepted that worship and they fell. In fact, we need to take another quick side trip to the book of Psalms. I told you we're going to go all over the place with this, but trust me, we're going to get back to it. We're going to get back to everything, but we need to take this long journey. Psalms 82. Start reading at verse 1. God has taken his place in the divine council. The divine council is the angelic council that God has. We've talked about them before in the supernatural worldview. In the midst of the gods, the Elohim, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So God is saying that these Elohim, these gods, these angels who he put over the nations are not doing what he wanted them to do. They were supposed to be over the nations and judge them or lead them correctly, but they're not. And I'm going to go to verse 6. I said, you are gods, Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like men and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. This Psalms is God bringing accusation against those angels that he put over the nations, telling them that they have not done right, they have not judged well, they have not done the things that God wanted them to do to lead the nations justly. And he said, you are gods, Elohim, you are sons of the Most High, Benaiah Elohim. However, they were going to die like men. That's going to be their judgment. And it ends saying, arise, O God, judge you and inherit all the nations. So God is going to inherit the nations that he disinherited and put the angels over. Okay, stay with me. I'm going somewhere, I promise. So here's the situation. Babel happens. There's the fall at Babel. God divides the nations up by their languages. God puts his angels over these nations, 70 angels, saying, I disinherited these nations. You guys judge them. And by judge means lead, not meaning a judgment. A judge isn't putting judgment on them, but means lead them. That's what the book of Judges is all about. The book of Judges is about leaders who are called judges. God is saying, govern these nations, and he says, govern them rightly. Look out for the weak and the poor, and give partiality to the good and not the wicked. These angels all fell, every single one of them, and they did the opposite. They gave partiality to the wicked. They did not look after the poor and the weak. And God says that he's going to judge them. He is going to re-inherit. God is going to take back all those nations from them because they did wrong. Okay, still with me? Good, let's keep going. So these angels did poorly, and they allowed themselves to be worshipped as God. And they began to covet that worship because there's something about worship in the spiritual realm that gives them power. That's why Satan fell. Satan wanted to be worshipped. These angels fell because they coveted that worship. And there is some kind of transference of spiritual power when worship happens. When men worship anything, it gives them power. And these angels lusted after that power the same way Satan did, and they fell. So when you hear all these stories about the so-called gods, these pantheons of gods that the ancient people worshipped, like the Egyptians and the Persians and the Amalekites and the Philistines and the Greeks and the Romans and all these different gods, they didn't just make these gods up. These were actual entities that they interacted with. These were the angels that God put over the nations. That's why they worshiped them, not because they were primitive and stupid and just wanted to assign a god to anything that, the wind and the sea and the earth and fire. No. They actually interacted with these spiritual beings. That's why they worshiped them. Now, when you look at mythology, you will see a lot of these wars between the gods. These so-called gods were always warring with each other. You see that in Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, Persian mythology, Norse mythology. Gods are always at war. Why are these so-called gods, these Elohim, these angels at war? Because they wanted more worship. They were fallen beings now. They were evil. They wanted more worship. How do you get more worship? You get another nation. If all the people in your nation are worshiping you and you want more worship, then you have to conquer another nation. So they were fighting with each other. And that's where all the wars and empires come from. They come from yes, they're happening on earth, obviously, with armies, the Greeks and the Persians and the Romans and the Assyrians and Egyptians all fighting each other, but behind them were these spiritual entities also fighting in the spiritual realm. And again, we see that in Daniel chapter 10 with the prince of the power of Persia and of Greece. And of course, that was a prince of the power of Babylon, and there's a prince of Assyria, and there was a prince of Egypt, and a prince of Rome, who we'll talk about in just a second. They're all fighting with each other. So at some point, this battle ends, this battle royale of all the Elohim gods and all the empires fighting eventually comes to a conclusion, and one Elohim, one spiritual entity, comes out on top. Who is that entity? Satan, the devil. How do we know that? Because we know at the time of Jesus, when Satan tempts Jesus in the Gospels, what does he say? What is his final temptation to Jesus? He says to Jesus, all the kingdoms of the world are mine, and I can give them to whomever I choose. If you fall down and worship me, I'll give you the kingdoms. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And notice that Jesus never disputed that. Jesus didn't say, Satan, you're lying. You don't have power over all the kingdoms of the world. No, Jesus just resisted the temptation, but he never denied Satan's claim that he had access, or that he had rulership over all the nations. So at some point between Deuteronomy 32 and the Gospels, Satan won the war. He became the ultimate ruler, and all the other Elohim, the angels who had dominion over the other nations, were subjected to him. When did this happen? When did Satan win this war? I would contend that we're seeing that, or we're seeing at least the beginnings of that, the conclusion of it, in Daniel chapter 7. So now we get back, now that we understand all that, let's get back to Daniel chapter 7. So what are we seeing in Daniel chapter 7? We are seeing the final 4 empires of the world. So apparently they consolidated empires here and there. The empire of Babylon, so whoever the prince of the power of Babylon was, it had won governance over the entire world. Babylon was the world empire. But then the prince of Persia beat him out and won conquest of the world then. And then the power of Greece came, and he defeated the prince of Persia. And then you have the final one, the empire of Rome, which was the final world empire. And so I have to believe that Satan was in control of Rome, and he got the final battle. He won the final battle, and he is the emperor. He became emperor of the world, as it were, in the spiritual realm, and he has that empire to this day. And as I said before, you might be saying, wait a minute, Rome is not ruling the world to this day. I would dare say it is. Yes, the Roman Empire physically ended around the 3rd or 4th century AD. However, it didn't go away. It stopped being a military empire, a military dictatorship, and it became a theocracy. We talked about this when we looked at the churches of Pergamos and Thyatira earlier on in this study. When we looked at those 7 letters to 7 churches, go back and listen to those again. What happened? Constantine, who was one of the final secular rulers of Rome, he allegedly adopted Christianity, and he made Christianity the official, and accepted Christianity, and his third successor, Theodosius, made Christianity the official religion of Rome. So what happened then? Then you had Catholicism. Catholicism came out of that, and Catholicism, even though the Roman Empire proper stopped ruling the world from the 4th century, from the 5th century on to this very day, the dominant power in the world has been the Catholic Church. And they still wield incredible power to this day. They are in every government in the world. Their cathedrals are in every country in the world, even countries that are supposed to be non-Christian. They're in Russia. There are cathedrals. There are cathedrals in the Middle East. There are cathedrals in the Orient, in Asia. They control the world still. The families that, I'm not going to get way too deep into the conspiratorial aspect of it, but suffice to say that the people who control the world today still have obeisance to Rome. So I would dare say that Rome, that empire, still exists, but it's a theocracy. It's not a military empire. And it's actually more effective. I mean, if you are a physical empire, then you need an army or a large military to keep everyone in check. However, if you have a theocracy, a religious empire, you don't need an army, because people will police themselves. They will obey the theocratic law, not because they're afraid of a military, but because they're afraid of the so-called gods. So that's an even more effective empire. And again, it exists to this day, even if it's not nominally, it's nominally Christian. It's very, very pagan. Again, I'm not going to get into that. I do a whole series on the Catholic Church. You can look at it yourself. But you get into the paganism involved, the people who run the world, the families that run the world, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Medicis, all those families who control trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in wealth. People who make Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Elon Musk look like this homeless as far as a monetary comparison. Those people run the world, and they are all Luciferian Satanists. Satan runs this world. So there we go. All right. So what does that have to do with Daniel 7? And more importantly, what does it have to do with Revelation chapter 10? Stay with me. I'm going somewhere with this, folks. Stay tuned in. So what's happening in Daniel chapter 7? We have these 4 beasts, and obviously you have the 4th beast, which is the Roman Empire, which is Satan's conquest. What happens next? Then you see this little horn, who is speaking pompous words and basically conquers the world and has the eyes like a man. Who is this? This little horn is the Antichrist. We're going to talk about him several episodes down the line, but this is one of the titles of the Antichrist. It's pretty much agreed upon by eschatologists and Bible teachers, and I agree with it as well. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that, which we'll get into later. But stay with me and just understand that this little horn that comes from this beast, from this final empire, from Satan's empire, is his Antichrist, his false Messiah. So what we're seeing here is God is showing Daniel all Satan's entire plan. He's going to subjugate these final four empires. He's going to take over everything, and then he's going to bring about his false Messiah. Basically, God is showing Daniel Satan's entire plan. Now that Satan has won everything over, he is showing what he's going to do. He's going to set up a false Messiah, and he's going to get the world to worship this false Messiah, and that is Satan's ultimate goal. Satan has essentially stated his will as to what his plan is. Now that Satan has done that, he's basically tipped his hand. God now knows Satan's will, and now God can set up trial and judgment. God can't judge you until you state your will of what you're going to do, because until you state your will and carry it out, well, you could always change your mind. Satan has stated his will. God knows what he's going to do, and now God can justly start his process of dealing with that. And he does it with the next verse. When you see, and this is really important, so I'm going to read it to you again. Daniel 7 verse 9. I watched till thrones were put in place. The Ancient of Days was seated. And it describes the Ancient of Days. And then in chapter 10, it says, the court was seated and the books were opened. What does that mean? Thrones were put in place, a court was seated, and books were opened. Notice what's happening here, folks. This is the initiation of a trial. You have thrones put in place. And notice, by the way, there's no one sitting on these thrones yet. Notice that. That's very important. We're going to get to that, but that is vitally important. Remember, these thrones are put in place. No one's sitting on them. But then there is a court. It said right there, there is a court that is another group of people, a group of entities, and the books were opened. This is a trial. If you know anything about how a Jewish trial is conducted, and the people reading this would have known this, the Jews reading this from the 1st and 2nd century during Jesus' time, they knew that this Daniel here is describing a court of law, and a trial is occurring. The books were open. That's where books are where the proceedings are recorded and where judgment is read and rendered. And God shows Daniel what the conclusion of the trial is going to be. In verse 11, he says, I watched because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, that final empire, its body destroyed and given over to burning flame. And the rest of the beasts had their dominion taken away. All right, so that's the conclusion of the trial. He's given this in advance. God's already telling you what the judgment is, even though the trial is starting. The judgment is that this beast, Satan's empire, is going to be destroyed. The Antichrist is going to be destroyed, and all the other empires are going to be destroyed as well. Now listen to this. Verse 13, I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And verse 14, to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom of all nations. So at the conclusion of this trial, the beast is destroyed, and all the kingdoms of the world is given to this one like the Son of Man riding on a cloud. Who is this Son of Man riding on a cloud? Who gets this dominion? This is Jesus. Jesus is the Son of Man riding on the clouds. How do we know this? Because that's the title Jesus gives himself. Have you ever wondered when you're reading the Gospels why Jesus always refers to himself as the Son of Man? That's what he calls himself. You look at the verse where Jesus is talking about his identity, where he asks his disciples, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Jesus calls himself the Son of Man throughout the Gospels. And I wondered about that. I'm like, why does he call himself the Son of Man? Why doesn't he call himself the Son of God? I mean, that's who he is. Why does he refer to himself as a Son of Man? He doesn't refer to himself as a Son of Man. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. And the Jewish people at this time, who are very familiar with the Bible, very familiar with the book of Daniel, would have known that Jesus was calling himself this guy, When Jesus said, I am the Son of Man, what he is saying is, hey, people, I'm the person Daniel wrote about in chapter 7. I am the one riding on the clouds who is going to get dominion over all the nations. I'm the one who's going to judge the nations. This is me. I am the Son of Man. I am this guy. This is me. He is here, and I'm going to be the one who judges the nations. And this is what the Jews were expecting. Remember that the Jews were always asking Jesus, even his disciples, saying, hey, Jesus, when are you going to bring forth the kingdom? And Jesus would always say, well, my time is not yet. He didn't say he wasn't going to. He said his time is not yet. Why? Because they knew that the goal of the Son of Man, the ultimate destiny of this Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7 is to inherit the nations. And they wanted that because they knew that when they inherit the nations, then that would bring in the kingdom where the Jewish people would be ruling all the nations from Israel. They wanted that deeply, and they knew that Jesus was going to do that because Jesus called himself the Son of Man. This is the first time that term is used as a title of God in the Bible. Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man riding on the clouds. The cloud rider is a Jewish designation of God. God is the one who rides on the clouds. When during the wilderness wanderings, the Jews would follow a pillar of clouds by day and a pillar of fire by night. We see that throughout the Exodus story in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. That pillar of clouds was God's presence. A title of God was the one who rides on the clouds. And we see that again here in Daniel chapter 7 with one riding on the clouds. Now we know it's not God the Father because he's the Ancient of Days who's mentioned first in the earlier verse. So how can he be the Ancient of Days and riding on the clouds? Well, because we know that there's a Trinity. God is triune. So God the Father is the Ancient of Days, and the God of the person of the Godhead who is riding on the clouds is Jesus. He is the one, the Son of Man, riding on the clouds. And every time he called himself the Son of Man, he was saying, that's me. I'm the guy in Daniel chapter 7 who's going to inherit the nations and who's going to have this dominion. So Daniel chapter 7, this is so cool. Daniel chapter 7 is when Jesus was commissioned. So God says, okay, Satan, I see what you're going to do. I see your whole plan laid out. Great. Now here's my plan. Hey, you, Jesus, son, come here. Come ride on the clouds here. I'm going to give you the dominion over the nations. Satan is done. I'm going to take care of him. He's going to be destroyed. We're going to burn him. And you are going to inherit the nations. This is when Jesus was commissioned to come down to earth and conquer and take over the nations. And remember, this is a trial. The books are open. The court is seated. What is Jesus' role in this trial? Jesus' role in this trial, he is, for lack of a better term, he's the plaintiff. He's the one bringing the accusation. He's the one who is going to win. When you have a plaintiff and the defendant, the plaintiff wins and he gets the reward, the judgment in his favor. In his judgment, the judgment in his favor that he's going to get is dominion over the nation. So Jesus is the plaintiff here. And so he has to go to earth in order to suffer under the nations, under Satan, who's in control of the nations. And what happens when he comes to earth? He's killed. The nations, in this case, the nation, the empire that ruled the world, Rome, executed him. And because they executed him, they committed a wrong against him. And now, justly, Jesus can claim damages. Again, I'm staying with legal language. That's what Jesus is commissioned to go down to earth at this point and to present himself. And what happens when he presents himself again? He's killed. And God says, you get these nations now. That's what's going on here. But here's the thing. The trial began in Daniel 7. And we know what the conclusion is going to be. We know what the judgment is going to be because it just said right there, Jesus gets the dominion. The final beast gets taken out. But the trial is ongoing. The trial is not going to end until Revelation chapter 10. The trial is ongoing right now. In fact, we are in the midst of the trial. And if you're a Christian, you have a very important role in this trial. What is your role? This is going to be cool. Wait till you hear this. It's going to blow you away. We are the jury. If you are a Christian, you are a part of the jury in this trial. Why? Remember that those thrones that were set up were not occupied. They will be occupied later. We're going to see another vision. Actually, it's a vision we've already covered in Revelation chapter 4, where we see the exact same courtroom. Let's go back to Revelation chapter 4, which we covered a long time ago. We covered a few months ago. And again, I wish I had this knowledge then, because I would have put this all together. But we're going to have to do it retrospectively. What happens in Revelation chapter 4? You have the same scene. You have God sitting on a throne. You have angels all around him ministering to him. You have thrones set up. But the difference between the thrones in Daniel 7 and the thrones in Revelation chapter 4 is that seated on the throne are the 24 elders. Who are the 24 elders? The 24 elders represent the church. Those thrones are now occupied by the jury in this trial. That's us. Christians who are in that first rapture, the faithful Christians, are going to join this trial. Revelation chapter 4 is the same scenery, the same court scene as Daniel chapter 7. So it's the court's back in session, and now you have the 24 elders. Why? Because the church age is over. It ends in Revelation chapter 3, and now the believing church is in heaven, sitting on those thrones, judging the nations, judging those Elohim. Paul himself said to us, don't you know that you will judge angels? Paul says that. And I have the verse up on the screen here where Paul says we will judge angels. How do we judge them? Because we're the jury in this trial of the ages, the trial of the fallen angels that God promised them in Psalm 82 after they were given this dominion, and we're going to judge them. How do we know we're judging them? When were we commissioned to judge them? Jesus commissioned us to judge them. Why? How do we know that? Because the 7 letters, the 7 churches, in each one of those 7 letters, which again, those 7 letters encompass the entire church age, from the church at Ephesus all the way to the church at Laodicea. What does God tell us to do? We're interacting with the world. We're interacting with the nations. And if we overcome, certain promises are given to us, and those promises, many of them are very much tied to a jury trial. I'll give you some examples. In the letter to the church at Pergamos, Jesus says that those who overcome will be given a white stone. What does that mean? Because a white stone and a black stone were how you judged in a jury trial. A white stone meant the person who was accused was innocent. A black stone meant they were guilty. You also see in the letter to the church of Laodicea that those who overcome, he will grant to sit with him on the throne, and along with the Father on his throne. You have the people here sitting on thrones. So if you overcome in the time in the church age, if you overcome the world, if you are able to overcome the nations and the evil influence that we're all under, because we're still under that evil influence. Jesus has not claimed the world yet. We know that because, well, look at the world. And we know that Jesus, that's what we've been talking about the last few weeks and months with the 7 trumpets, is the strongholds are being brought down so Jesus can claim the world. He hasn't done it yet. The church is living throughout the world, and we're now gathering evidence. Basically, the way the world treats the church is how we will judge the world and judge the entities that are over the world. We will judge these angels. We are the jury, and we're kind of the star witnesses. Jesus is the star witness, but so are we, because we are witnessing what the world is doing to us and to Christians. And so we will have the authority to judge these angels over the nations because we've experienced what the nations have done to us in the name of evil. So all of us Christians who are being persecuted, be it physically like Christians throughout the ages and in certain parts of the world, or being persecuted culturally and socially as Christians in America are persecuted, where we are disparaged and we're called stupid and unscientific and bigoted and homophobic. We're called all these things. Christians are the only group in America that you can still disparage and get away with it. You know, you can't say anything about gays or any other minority or any belief system or any gender, even though they keep making up genders. I think they're saying like 50 genders right now, which is ridiculous. They're actually 2. But if you don't agree with that, then you're a bigot and you're marginalized and you're called all kinds of names. But we will judge that. Why? Because we're suffering it, so we can be witnesses. Here's the thing. We are the representatives of Jesus on this earth. Just as Jesus was marginalized and he was killed and he had to suffer, so will we be marginalized and we have to suffer because we are a part of the body of Christ. And so we get to judge what's been done to us throughout the centuries. So that's what this is all about. This is part of the trial. So the 7 letters to 7 churches are basically our jury instructions. If you've ever been on a jury instructions are given to the jurists. The 7 letters are not just commendations, accusations, and promises. They're also our jury instructions as to how we are to interact with the defendants. In this case, again, the nations, the fallen angels over the nations. So in many ways, you can look at all of history from the time of Babel all the way up to this very second as part of the trial of the disinherited nations and how they would react. And that brings us all the way back to, finally, to Revelation chapter 10. And here is where I'm going to show you again my conclusion that Jesus is this angel coming out from heaven clothed with a cloud. What is he doing? He's clothed with the cloud. He's riding the cloud. Now, when I said that one of the titles of God was the rider on the cloud. Well, it doesn't mean he's riding a cloud like a motorcycle where he's sitting on the cloud. No, it means he's enrobed in the cloud. And here's where it is. He's clothed here in a cloud. A rainbow was on his head. That's the rainbow we see in the throne room. His face was like the sun. Is light. Jesus is light, and there is no darkness in him. We learn that in the epistles of John. And his feet like pillars of fire. We see that same thing in Revelation chapter 1. His feet were like bronze, fiery bonds are like pillars of fire. Fire is judgment. And he had a little book opened in his hand. This is Jesus. Why? Because this is the same figure. This is the Son of Man figure in Daniel chapter 7. The Son of Man is a title of Jesus. This is the same entity, clothed in a cloud, rainbow on his head, face like the sun. Folks, this is Jesus. That's who he is. And the fact that he's described this way tells you that this is referencing Daniel chapter 7. This is referencing that same trial where he was commissioned at this trial to get dominion over the nations. He would inherit the nations here. And it's no coincidence that this vision happens right after the strongholds of Satan over the world are broken with the six trumpets that have been blown so far. Okay, let's keep going. He had a little book in his hand. I'm not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that next time. I don't have time to get into the little book. We're already way over time. Again, so let's go to verse 3. He cried out with a loud voice as when a lion roars. He sees the lion of the tribe of Judah. And when he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Now, when the 7 thunders uttered, John was about to write, but he was told not to write what the thunders say. What did the thunder say? We don't know. This is one of 2 verses in Revelation for which I have no explanation. The first we talked about a couple episodes ago was how men could want to die and not be able to die with the 5th trumpet and the locust. I don't know how that's possible. And I don't know what the 7th thunder says. You know what? No one knows. If anyone tells you they know for sure what those 7 thunders said, they are lying, because no one knows. It's sealed and it's sealed up. We don't know what they are. I will speculate now. I had no speculation before, but I have some speculation now. My speculation is whatever these thunders said, what they said had to do with the conclusion of this trial. And the reason I believe that and why I believe it's sealed, well, because this really harkens back to the trial that began in Daniel chapter 7 that we see again in Revelation chapter 4. And I believe whatever the thunder said has something to do with this final judgment, the final conclusion of the trial. And why does God want it sealed up? Because we're talking about counterintelligence here, folks. One of the reasons why the coming of Jesus was so mysterious in the Old Testament, and it was never fully revealed, the mystery was not revealed until Paul revealed it for himself. And that mystery was that the church, the Gentiles, will be they'll be grafted into Judaism, and the Gentiles will be saved too. Paul says that it's a mystery. It's a mystery because if Satan and the fallen angels knew everything in advance, they could try to stop it. If Satan knew that Jesus' death on the cross would be the final nail in his coffin, that would be what would be his final defeat, then of course Satan never would have tried to have Jesus killed. Satan would have said, look, let's keep this guy alive because the death of Jesus is my defeat. I don't want to kill him. But because they didn't know that fully, because it was shrouded in mystery in the Old Testament, Satan, and he commissioned Jesus to be killed through the Roman Empire and the Jews and the Jewish leadership. Well, again, that was defeat. And I believe that whatever the seven thunders uttered, is something that God does not want Satan to know, because it would be something that Satan could use to avoid his final fate. So that's my guess. Don't know. That could be wrong. Have no idea, but that's just my guess based on this being the end of the trial. And here's my other reason for believing that this is the end, because of what Jesus says here, starting in verse 5, the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land. So keep in mind, he has 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. What does that signify? He has dominion over both. He has dominion. He is claiming dominion over the entire earth, the land and the sea. And it says in verse 5, he raised his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created all things, that's God. In verse 7, that in the days of that, still in verse 6, that there should be delay no longer. Delay no longer in what? In the trial, in the judgment. It's done. This trial is over. There will be no longer any delay in that conclusion. What was the conclusion of the trial? Again, that the final beast, Satan's kingdom, would be burned, and the Antichrist would be destroyed, and Jesus would inherit the nations. Jesus said this, which delay is over. The trial is done. Let's get the verdict. The verdict is guilty. The judgment in favor of the plaintiff is the beast gets destroyed, and the kingdoms of the world become the kingdoms of Jesus. And we're going to see that happen actually as soon as the seventh trumpet is blown, but there's delay no longer. This is the end. Verse 7, but in the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound, the mystery of God will be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. What is the mystery of God? It's God's will. And what is God's will? That's going to be finished. Again, we already saw it, that Jesus would inherit all the nations of the world, and that we would rule and reign with him. The mystery will be finished. When that seventh angel sounds, that's it. It's done. And that's when the bowls of wrath are poured out. That's when Armageddon happens after that. And when Satan is bound and put away. And then a millennium happens where Jesus rules the world for 1,000 years. And we rule and reign with him from Jerusalem. So that's what this is all about. That's Revelation chapter 10 is the end of the trial. And Jesus says there'll be delay no longer. Let's get that verdict out and let's get this going. So that's it, folks. Some truly, truly amazing stuff that's all wrapped up in this one passage. We didn't even get to him eating the book. So yeah, I'm stunned by this trial of the ages that has happened, that started in Daniel chapter 7, that's been happening throughout the ages, that's happening to this day. If you are a Christian, if you are part of the church, this life we're living right now, you are gathering the evidence. You're the jury in this trial. You're going to judge the angels. Paul said so. We're going to judge them. We're going to be sitting on those thrones in the jury box, giving final judgment over all the evil that has happened in this world by these nations, inspired by the fallen angels who've ruled over them. And when we get to this point in Revelation, after Satan's false apocalypse and his rule over the earth and the seven trumpets being blown, Jesus says it's over. It's time for the final judgment, and let's get the millennium started. Let's clear all the evil off the board, and let's have this millennial kingdom followed by heaven. And that's where we are. Wow. Okay. I'm almost at an hour, so this went way longer than normal, but this is just vital stuff. So please let me know if you have any questions. Give me any comments you have in the comment section. Again, this is information that I only learned a few months ago through the work of people like Michael Heiser and some other folks that I had talked to who are very wise, and I appreciate them for bringing these things to my attention. And it just blew me away, this whole idea of the trial of the ages. And this is what Revelation is all about. This is what our history is all about. God judging these nations for all the evil they've done with their empire building and all the evil, the wars, the famines, the ravages, the incredible things that have been done in the name of empire building and worshiping these false gods. And there's so much stuff. But anyway, it's over now, and we're going to get on to the next episode. In the next episode, I'm going to wrap up chapter 10 with the little book and John eating it and what that means. And we're also going to get started on the two witnesses. We're going to end chapter 10 and start getting into chapter 11, the two witnesses. Who are the two witnesses? What's their identity? What's their purpose? And what's their fate? And how does that impact the rest of the book? We'll talk about that next time. So thank you for watching and listening. I appreciate it. Please subscribe to Faith by Reason by putting your email address to the right navigation area on faithbyreason.net. Please, please, please subscribe here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. It's really easy. It will only take you half a second to do that. Hit the like button as well so that this can be shared with more people. Hit the share button to share with everyone who is in contact with you on YouTube. And I will talk to you next episode when we look at the two witnesses.